Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm really excited to host this session today. My name is Maiko Schaffrath. I'm the host and founder of Impact Hustlers, which is a weekly podcast featuring entrepreneurs that solve the world's biggest issues. And today, this session, the next hour, we will spend with some of the most amazing ecosystem builders that I've come across, talking about the impact ecosystem. Impact ecosystem, but also plural impact ecosystems across the world, because we will have leaders and ecosystem builders join us from all over the world, based in Europe, in the US, across Africa, and actually doing projects all over the world. So we should have a lot of different perspectives being shared today of what the state of the impact ecosystem is currently across the world. And most importantly, for all of us and for you listening and watching this, what can we do to bring the impact ecosystem to the next level, mainly for the purpose to solve the world's biggest social and environmental problems. This topic is really close to my heart. I've actually spoken to Santiago, who will join us in a second, the founder and CEO of ChangeNOW, about exactly that topic during a podcast recording recently. And I've spoke to him on how ChangeNOW has actually been part of this whole development of the impact ecosystem over the last few years, since ChangeNOW was launched in 2016, from a really small event in Paris with a big vision to now the biggest gathering of impact-driven change makers in the world. And I'm really excited, I think, to welcome Santiago onto the stage, and also have him joined by Saeed Amidi, who is the founder and CEO of Plug and Play. Again, one of the most exciting ecosystem builders we could have on here, based in Silicon Valley, but working all over the world on building startup and technology ecosystems. One of the early investors in PayPal, but I'll let you introduce yourself in a second. So welcome, Santiago and Saeed. Thanks for joining.
Great to be here.
Perfect. So what I'd like to start with is each of you give a 1 minute quick introduction to who you are and how are you involved in building impact ecosystems, and what's your angle on it? What do you think? Where are we at right now in terms of building impact ecosystems in the world in your area? Maybe Saeed, if you want to start.
Yes, I am the CEO and the founder of Plug and Play. And we started in Silicon Valley about 16 years ago, but soon expanded to approximately 35 locations, from Shanghai, Singapore, Munich, Paris, etc. And we help about 2,000 startups per year to go through their journey, and we invest in about 200 of them. But we feel when you create this innovation platform and help the startups, the entrepreneurs, connect with funding, cooperation, and to each other, magic happens. And recently I have become more interested in sustainability and impact investing, with launching 6 global hubs with Alliance to End Plastic Waste in Singapore, Paris, Silicon Valley, Shanghai, and soon Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Johannesburg, Africa. But I'm passionate about helping the entrepreneur build their dream and change the world.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us, Saeed. And Santiago.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Santiago. I'm the founder and CEO of ChangeNOW. And our vision of the ecosystem is that in every big change in history, change has come not from just one solution, but really from ecosystems. We can take, for example, the Renaissance. This was really an ecosystem of artists meeting with politics at that age and people supporting financially this ecosystem. For the tech, also, the tech ecosystem has been really strong in changing the world. And so ChangeNOW was just figuring that we needed to create and really create a lot of links, like in the brain, all the links that will help the solutions to be part of an ecosystem and so to grow at scale. So this is the vision of ChangeNOW, and we do it first by organizing this annual summit, which is today the largest event for the planet, with 1,000 solutions that we gather, a lot of partners, investors, media, and everything that can help them grow. And we can discuss, but ChangeNOW is also about solving other failures in the ecosystem, so the ecosystem is more efficient and good.
Yeah, let's talk about that in a second. I'd love to start with Saeed, because I think there's so many lessons we can learn from your experience over the last 20 years, being in Silicon Valley, but also being traveling really all over the world and implementing innovation projects, investing in technology companies. I'm interested in how far do you think the impact world, the social impact world, can learn first from Silicon Valley and how the ecosystem has been built locally, but then also generally from the digital innovation, tech-driven companies that have risen to dominance in the last decade, really. What are the lessons that we can learn from that to apply it to companies that are solving social and environmental problems?
Very good question. I have been lucky enough to have the front seat and see how Google gets started with Larry and Sergey, and then they organize the information of the world. And I believe really nowadays, nobody does anything before you Google the information at your fingertip and learn from it. Also, LinkedIn is less than 2 kilometers from our headquarters. And again, I generally, any meeting I have, I first look at the profile of the group on LinkedIn. And I believe that increases efficiency and productivity. And what we can learn from Silicon Valley is when they solve a problem, when they solve, organizing information of the world, then they really focus and build it the best way possible and the fastest way possible. I think what we can learn from Silicon Valley is that they build the product, then they scale it globally. And we hope to do this in impact investing, in sustainability investing, because if we can find solutions that economically it makes sense, so it has to be self-sustainable, but at the same time solve some of the big problems in the world like hunger, water, education, etc. But I believe any sort of implementation has to be self-sustained and financially viable.
Absolutely. Santiago, let's jump in on that. You've been building ecosystems for a few years now. I remember us talking on the podcast about the first ChangeNOW iteration, how you had to actually pull out your first, your personal funds to even make it happen. And I think you got a small crowd compared to what we got today with ChangeNOW. So tell us, maybe following up and referring to what Saeed just said in terms of what we can learn from Silicon Valley, what we can learn from tech ecosystems. How have you seen the impact ecosystem evolve since you launched ChangeNOW a few years ago? And do you think the model of kind of the incubation and then massive scale globally, unicorn and beyond Google model is the model for the impact ecosystem as well, or do we need something a little bit different to that?
Great question, Michael. So first of all, I just wanted to recall also that indeed ChangeNOW is also a startup. And ChangeNOW really used a lot of learnings from the tech ecosystem. And what we can learn from the tech ecosystem, for me, there are two things. The first one is method, because there is a real method of how you try, test and learn, how you try it, and then you build your company up and scaling up, and also finding support. So there's a real entrepreneurial approach, very well tuned now, that we can apply to many other fields. That's the first one, the method. And the second one is also the ambition. I think that tech entrepreneurs is maybe one of the first generations when they started to sell something by saying this will be a global success and we'll connect everyone on the planet. So there was a real global ambition coming from the .NET startups. So for me, those are the two learnings, and I think that we can apply and we should apply both to impact ecosystem, because today the challenges we have to solve are immense. They're huge. So we need to have a lot of ambition to solve that. And also, we can't just solve them by writing something on paper. We need to try and test and have an entrepreneurial approach. So for me, this is really the two things. And just quickly to answer your question about how the impact ecosystem evolved since we started. So first thing, definitely the impact ecosystem matured. It grew. Well, it grew a lot. Meaning that an event like the one we had this year or last year, with gathering every time 1,000 solutions, this was not possible when we started in 2017. And also when we see on the funding part, well, in 2018, the second edition, the average ticket raised at the event was around 200 to 300 K euros. And for the next edition, startups were more looking for 1.5 million euros, so 5 times that. So it really grew up.
Got it. Saeed, maybe let's talk a little bit about your ambition to kind of push into the impact ecosystem with some of the work you're doing. I know that you are working on a sustainability focused program, on a plastic pollution focused program, and you've actually invested in a range of impact-driven companies. What is your approach to help the ecosystem scale and build and really create those type of companies that can change the game for all of us globally?
First, if I may add to what Santiago mentioned, when I meet a team of entrepreneurs, one of my question is how passionate and how committed are the entrepreneurs? And sometimes I ask them, if this doesn't work, what are you going to do? And if they have like they say, I'm going to go back to school or I'm going to go get my regular job back, I don't invest, because I don't think they should have an option too. They should be so passionate and committed to the cause they are going after. Then second, they have to be qualified. I now have incredible respect for Stanford, MIT, Oxford. They have to be smart enough and technical enough to build the product to solve a problem. And we've been doing this quite for a long time with software and technology. And you're absolutely right, applying that method to plastic waste, it's not easy, because plastic waste is distributed all over the world from primarily the 7 rivers, and to be able to pick that up efficiently, economically, and repurpose it for another good. Like we have a company in South America that we make plastic bricks out of wasted plastic. Then we make houses out of it. And economically, we reuse the plastic, which is worth, $2 per kilo. So if instead of going it in the landfills, if you can repurpose it to build houses, I think that is a great solution we are after. And then we are bringing that company to US to scale the business, and the scaling economical impact will multiply rather than that company being a small, profitable company in Latin America. Possibly it can become a global company.
Got it. In the last few minutes, I'd love to cover something we've spoken a lot about as entrepreneurs, the role of startups and technology, but actually with both the work of ChangeNOW, but also of Plug and Play, you are actually involving other actors as well that are really crucial. In the case of Plug and Play, you're working heavily with corporates. ChangeNOW is involving really policymakers, decision makers, charities, corporate decision makers. And I think we probably all agree that while social entrepreneurs are the real change makers, very often we do need to all work together, collaborate, and make it happen among all these different actors. And maybe if I make a reference back to kind of the Silicon Valley conversation we just had, maybe that model was quite a disruption-driven model, right? Where the entrepreneurs came up with a new model, and then government, policymakers, and corporates had to play catch up, right? To catch up with the innovation. And I'm interested, especially with your approach, be keen to hear from each of you briefly. How should the approach be for the impact ecosystem? Should it be very similar, or is it more of a model of collaboration with governments, with corporates, and with decision makers?
So if I may jump in, I remember when PayPal got started in our building, and they didn't have a banking license. They transferred money and took people's money in deposits without that. And as you said, later on they went back to the regulations and got the licenses they required. Sometimes change happens faster than what the government or the laws allow. And it's not to break any law, but I believe the entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, they can start something like the electric car, and in the beginning it lost a lot of money, but then they changed the whole industry. And hopefully, like right now, every major car producer is all the way in electrification. So we feel that commitment of the entrepreneur goes first, and then the law and the other technologies that enhances the solution follows. But again, I think what we can learn, nobody imagined Tesla changing the whole world of car industry, but it just happened to be again in Silicon Valley. And if I am not mistaken, Tesla is now worth as much as 5 other car makers combined. But I think it's that commitment, that most important element of success, and then being able to scale.
Got it. Santiago, you want to share your 2 cents on that question as well?
Definitely, I can jump in on this one too. For me, I just want to say that entrepreneurs have a real role to play in the transition, because what we've noticed also from the ground is that you have the policymakers, and you have on the other side also citizens and NGOs who are putting some pressure on the policymakers to change laws, to find solutions. The thing is that solutions, they are not usually coming from policymakers. Those who are really building the new models, the new solutions, are the entrepreneurs and the companies. And the entrepreneurs that are the most innovative are here and have the opportunity to find the solutions that will help finally policymakers to say, okay, we got a real alternative. And so we are switching from, we are changing laws because we also have something that is proven to work, you know. And so this is what we need. And I think that entrepreneurs have to have in mind that they have this role to invent the models that will help the policymakers to change the rules.
Love it. Thank you very much, Santiago, and thank you, Saeed, for joining us and for sharing your experience. We'll move to the next part of this session. We have 3 parts in total, and in terms of geography, we're moving from Europe and the US. Well, back to some European decision makers again, but also across Israel and actually all over the world with the speakers that are on my next session for the next 20 minutes. And we got actually John Moreau, the founder and CEO of PHENIX, a company that offers solutions to reduce food waste, join us in a second. Then we got Miren Bengoa, the Managing Director, International Action at Groupe SOS, which is actually Europe's biggest social enterprise. And we got Omri Boral, based in Tel Aviv, the founder, co-founder, and CEO of TechForGood. So while we wait for them to join us here, there they are. Welcome to the panel. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Great. So we'll kick things off in the same way we just did for the previous session. I'd love each of you to give a 1-minute, strictly quick introduction on your role and how your day-to-day work is related to building impact ecosystems. Who wants to start? Miren, you want to go for it?
Sure. Hello, Maiko. Hello, everyone. Groupe SOS is indeed considered the largest social enterprise group in Europe, with over 21,000 collaborators and presence in over 33 countries. What we do is basically aim to make sure basic and quality services are accessible to all, making sure also that we reach out to the most vulnerable with these accessible services through hospitals, through shelters, through childcare, and many more opportunities. And therefore, my role at Groupe SOS Action Internationale is to ensure our international opportunities with our NGOs. We have 8 of them, work hand in hand to provide the best possible solutions and innovative solutions worldwide.
Great, thank you. Omri, go for it.
Thank you. So thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So TechForGood is based in Israel, but as Israel is such a tiny market, I'm sure you've heard about the disruption that Israeli technology has been making around the world. And TechForGood's mission is to bridge between the possibilities, the endless possibilities of technology innovation, and I think mostly entrepreneurial spirit. And between the needs of humanity, whether it's social or environmental. And to do that, what we do is we work with the demand side, with governments, with professional organizations, with large international corporations, to help them communicate their needs around impact innovation to entrepreneurs, both in Israel and around the world. And we work together with all of these stakeholders to build an ecosystem and to see to it that technology can actually make a difference in the world. Thank you.
Welcome to the panel. Thank you. And John, if you introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, I have two hats. The first one is an entrepreneur one. So I'm contributing to positive impact by fighting food waste at scale with PHENIX, which is the TechForGood startup I co-founded 7 years ago. connecting offer and demand on the surpluses and unsold products through an app and through a platform, digitalizing donations to charities. And my second hat is Ecosystem One, because I co-lead a collective called the Mouvement Impact France, promoting and defending a new way of entrepreneurship, contributing to positive social and environmental impact. I'm very happy to be here with you today.
We'll talk about that now in this session, and I'll start with you, John, actually, because you got those at least two hats on, right? You are an ecosystem builder, but you're also an entrepreneur. You are involved on the board of B Corp in France, which many in the audience may know, the B Corp movement, which is actually promoting this new way of doing business and helping companies get certified as a B Corp. But you're also running an impact-driven business yourself. How do you think the impact ecosystem, especially where you are in France, has evolved over the last few years, and what's the biggest challenge right now in your ecosystem for to grow even further?
I noticed a huge evolution over the past few years. When we started PHENIX back in 2013, 14, obviously we didn't invent the impact trend, because people like the Groupe SOS and many others already existed and had already demonstrated the proof that it could scale. But you had less financing, very few impact investment funds, and you have less talents on the market ready to join positive impact causes. Now it's a good way to attract talent, but at the time it was more, people were more skeptical about the ecosystem. And you had also fewer proof of concept, fewer companies that have proven that you could manage both growth or hyper-growth and positive impacts. And now I think over the past few years, that's probably one of the most one of the key successes, that we are a couple of companies showing that it's no longer antinomic, but it's possible to match both impact and growth ambition.
Got it.
And the challenge is, this one is continue to have more proof of concept and more iconic companies and more success to give people.
Got it. Let's move to Miren and Omri as well on that point, and your ecosystems. Obviously, Miren, you're also based in France, but with such a big conglomerate of social enterprises, you have so many insights into so many different markets and countries. How would you answer that question in terms of how the impact ecosystem has evolved, and what needs to be done right now to bring it to the next level?
Right. I think that any ecosystem to be strengthened requires a little bit of architecture. And so far, the history, this emerging incredible creativity of what we call the social and inclusive economy has been driven by the local initiatives, has been driven by people, by small organization cooperatives, NGOs, all over the place. And now to make sense out of all these amazing initiatives requires stronger advocacy, and the organization that Jean is leading is one of the key ones in France, but there are many more in Europe and abroad that showcase the importance of explaining what this social and inclusive economy says and does, how it operates, and how the norms that are starting to organize it are being defined, making sure that the value system that underlines it also is clear and let's say not only stressed, but also accounted for. We also are fearful of many newcomers in the impact system as a very large definition, using some of the key words, but not necessarily doing the actual good work on the ground. So what we hope is to set out the example of what actually works, how to measure it, and where the changes are actually needed, especially now after a huge turnaround with the COVID pandemic. Many of these needs are being shown much more clearly. And so these hybrid operators that are within this very broad definition of the social and inclusive economy and impact movements need to come together more strongly to advocate and to bring case by case the examples of what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, and as far as I know, you're actually involved actively, especially in France, pioneering the social and inclusive economy. I think the French government is actually also kind of pushing for that quite a bit. Give us a very brief overview of that, what that actually means, bringing those actors together and what the challenges with that.
Indeed, it's around this idea of not only bringing a coherent management system that can explain what all these different operators are doing. It's also making sure that we bring in the stakeholders that can make decisions that scale up all the solutions that are proposed. Pact for Impact is the name of this initiative. It was launched indeed with the support of the French government in 2019, but with many other governments and stakeholders, foundations, private sector entities, NGOs, and networks were around the table to make sure that this is not a unique initiative that builds on many others. We're looking at learning from all the other initiatives and ensuring that we disseminate it further, especially through public policy.
Got it. Omri, let's get your view on this as well. Obviously, Israel is a very interesting case study as well in terms of learning from the Israeli model of innovation, where the loads of big tech companies originated in Israel, kind of almost related to the discussion we just had with Saeed and Santiago on kind of being incubated and then really going for global dominance and scale. Is that what you're, let's say, those kind of best practices, are you trying to bring that into the impact ecosystem with the work you're doing? And how do you see the role of the Israeli ecosystem develop over the last years and the challenges ahead now?
So definitely, I think we can learn a lot and we can leverage the best practices that have already been evolved in the tech and innovation industry. I think that I know that the Israeli ecosystem has developed dramatically over the years. It's incredible to hear how it's been happening in other ecosystems as well. I think the first stage was that we managed to raise awareness of both founders and investors to the fact that addressing a social or environmental mission does not necessarily mean that you don't care or you're willing to compromise about the profits. So that was the first stage. And I think once that was established and people kind of got those first proofs that it is in fact possible, we started seeing a shift in the interest of both founders and investors into diving into these new set of opportunities, because suddenly these are not problems that need to be solved. These are new opportunities, new markets that can be explored. I think two very interesting developments that have been happening here as well is that we're seeing how the public sector, the regulators are joining in, starting to pay attention to these issues, starting to strategize around it. And perhaps the most important success factor for the Israeli ecosystem is the fact that we've been able to attract international organizations, mainly consumer-facing corporations, that have started to bring their needs and communicate what their strategy is around impact innovation here to Israel. Because one of the challenges of the Israeli ecosystem is that we're quite isolated. We're a very small market and we're away from where everything is happening. All the big markets are not here. So having the demand side coming here and working with the founders from early stages, I think that's a huge step forward. But I will say, and I think one of the main challenges of the impact ecosystem in general is that saying impact is it's too wide, it's too general. We have to start talking about specific sectors, industries, and at least here in Israel, we're seeing how around digital health or around food security and food technologies, agriculture, longevity issues. These are ecosystems in which Israel is very powerful in, is very strong in developing the impact solutions to. But there are many other issues and many other sectors where we have a lot to do in terms of building the ecosystems, bringing the stakeholders together to start talking to each other. And it has to be a cross-sector effort. We have to learn from each other. And this is, I think, how we can start rolling the ball in other sectors as well.
Got it. Do you think there's sectors in specific that you can share with us that you think really need further attention that have been neglected in the broader impact kind of space?
I'm not sure neglected, but I think the opportunities are massive and we're just starting to realize where they are exactly. I think food waste is an incredible example as to how the business need is very correlated with the impact mission of companies that can work in that space. Another sector that we are working a lot around is longevity. The world is aging, people are living longer, they have specific needs that are not only related to health, they're related to mobility and how cities need to be built, to fintech and finance needs, to communication, to in almost every sector, there are specific needs for this population, which is growing dramatically all over the world. And this is something that we have been focusing on, where I think we can demonstrate many opportunities for founders that are looking for the next challenge.
Exciting. We already touched on collaboration with other actors. I think all of you actually have this social entrepreneurial background. You're kind of either obviously started organizations yourself or working like very closely with social entrepreneurs. And in the previous part of the session, we discussed a bit what needs to be done to involve other crucial actors. And all of you actually doing this day to day and involving government, policymakers, working closely with corporates. I know, Omri, you're running a range of different programs with large corporates. John, you're obviously involved with key decision makers as well, with the B Corp movement kind of driving all this together, and then Miren really being kind of a pioneer of social enterprise and being involved in the social and inclusive economy initiative. So my question to all of you is, what do we need to double down on in terms of collaboration as, let's say, entrepreneurial members of the impact ecosystem to make sure things are actually happening? Should we all be reaching out more to government? Should we be working closer with corporates? What do we need to do looking forward to make the ecosystem stronger and actually deliver results? John, maybe you start with you now.
Sure, we can start with me. I have 3 messages. I mean, my personal experience is that we were very much helped by regulation, by other ecosystems, and for example, the French tech ecosystem, and also the collaboration between startups and big corporates. So regulation, it's very important to connect the impact ecosystem and the regulators, because if I take the example of food waste, the help of regulation has been instrumental for us, both in terms of incentive around taxes, around new laws banning food waste. So it has been a good help for us. Second thing, I learned a lot by breaking the silos and the verticals within impact investing, and tech and venture capital. And I learned a lot speaking to traditional startups like Criteo, BlaBlaCar, and taking the best tools, the best methodologies, ambition, and bringing it back to the impact and the social entrepreneurship ecosystem. I think it's very positive and helpful to build bridges between those two ecosystems that did not talk a lot until recently, and are now more and more connected from both sides. The traditional VC coming to impact, and the VC and the impact entrepreneurs coming to traditional finances. And the last one was the collaboration between startups and big corporates, because I think that today that's one of the key subjects to move from a pioneering ecosystem to kind of a norm. And if we don't bring with us all the big players, that's the role of Big Corp, that's the role of Impact de France, then we won't develop fast enough, and we will be just within pioneers. So we need the big groups, and we need everybody in the movement. So very keen to make collaborations between small and big companies.
Love it. Miren, let's move to you. What's your view on this?
Yeah, I'm very inspired by what was just said by both my co-panelists. To just point an additional, very key message is that poverty reduction to achieve the SDGs will also come through local initiative, and we need to be the strongest promoters of local entrepreneurs who find local and context-sensitive solutions. We cannot just make things up from a theoretical perspective. Even as impact-driven entrepreneurs, we would very much want to set forward a stronger stream of funding and training schemes, incubation schemes that will allow local entrepreneurs to bring new solutions that will be absolutely relevant to their own context. And that is precisely what we do through our incubator system called Pulse, which is active in Tunis, in Casablanca, in Cape Town in South Africa, and many other places in Eastern Europe as well. What they do is pretty much to send out calls for proposals for people who didn't even think of themselves as entrepreneurs, and especially social and environmental driven entrepreneurs. But as they go through the process, they come up with new ideas, they become even more confident in their capacity to be direct operators of change. And that's what we would like to promote. The idea that every single person, every citizen can be an agent of change. And it's not just about those extremely smart and well-connected startup citizens from great places in the world. We have to see the amazing creativity coming from the ground as well. And that's what we're trying to promote through our organizations as well.
Love it. Omri, your take.
I completely agree. I think one of the super interesting and very positive things that the impact ecosystem has brought to to the mainstream is the fact that an inclusive economy, and when we're looking at entrepreneurs, it's the same. Having an inclusive economy is not something that is a nice to have thing. This is something that we need. And just like Miren was saying, I think that people who come from different backgrounds and are not necessarily the kind of the stigma of who we would expect to be successful entrepreneurs in the world, these are the people who could come up with these inspiring and incredibly creative solutions that can bring something to really change how we see things. However, I also think that it is important to bring these people closer into the kind of traditional sources of power and to form these support systems to allow these super high potential ventures to really succeed. And really succeed also means to become incredibly profitable, to become large scale in how they operate, to answer the needs of the business sector. We're still at a stage where the impact ecosystem has to prove itself that it is no less than mainstream capitalism. And the more we do that, I think we will get a shift of more resources, more attention, and more talented people into these ecosystems.
That's such a good summary of what. Absolutely. Sorry, Miren, go ahead.
I was just going to add that giving them not only potential to grow those businesses in the first place, but to make sure they go through the different stages of life and death of ventures that any company will face, all these growth stages that need to be supported and accompanied with an incredible new knowledge that is being acquired worldwide on how to support local communities in developing solutions that are relevant to them, but making sure that that also raises interests of those who detain the power to fund them and to sustain them in the long run.
Yeah, perfect. We'll talk about funding. a very quick point, please. We'll have to move into the next session in a second, but do make a quick point if you want. Yeah, go ahead, John.
It's okay, no problem.
No worries.
Let's respect the timing.
God, because we will move to a range of other ecosystems. We'll actually focus on the African continent in a second with our next set of speakers. But thank you very much for joining us today. It was really inspirational to listen to the three of you. Thank you. Next up, we will talk about African ecosystems of impact with two really renowned speakers and practitioners. James Mwangi, the executive director of Dalberg Group, actually based in New York, but working all over Africa on different initiatives, which we'll cover in a second. And Tsitsi Masiyiwa, the co-chair and founder of the Higherlife Foundation, based actually where I am today as well in London, but working across Africa with their initiatives. So I'm really excited to have both of them join for the last section of this amazing panel on building ecosystems. And let's hope we can welcome them here in a second and have them on the screen. Welcome. There we go. Welcome, Tsitsi. Thanks for joining us. And hi, James.
Hi, Maiko. Hi, Tsitsi. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm good. Hi, James. You look nice.
I see you as always.
You both do. Love it. No, thanks very much for joining us. And I think the exciting part about this session is you actually have some shared collaboration experience already, and you've been actually driving initiatives together. And I'm really excited to have both of you on here to discuss maybe another angle to building impact ecosystems if we look at the different ecosystems that have evolved across African countries, across the African continent, and the work that you're doing. But before we do that, maybe each of you 1 minute, quick introduction for each of you of the work you're doing and how are you involved in building impact ecosystems. Tsitsi, you go ahead first. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So I'm an African philanthropist, and I chair and co-founded a Higherlife Foundation and Delta Philanthropies. And what we do is we invest in human capital development. And in order to be able to build thriving communities, to build sustainable livelihoods, and to the degree we can, to accelerate economic growth and social transformation on the continent. And we do this through a couple of interventions. We focus on education, on health, rural transformation, and disaster relief and preparedness. And we have our head office in Harare, Zimbabwe, but we work across the African continent.
Got it. James, quick introduction.
Thank you. I serve as executive director of the Dalberg Group, a collection of businesses and entities that I helped found about 20 years ago now, that works to ensure inclusive and sustainable prosperity for all around the world, with the belief that all people everywhere can then unleash and realize their full potential. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. We currently operate in about just under 30 countries, with a particularly heavy footprint in Africa. And our work, which started in management consulting, but now runs across a range of areas, including primary research, data analytics, human-centered design, media and communications, and then also launching new initiatives under Dalberg Catalyst, brings us into the impact ecosystem in a range of ways, particularly on the African continent, and working very often in partnership with philanthropists and impact leaders such as Mr. Masiyiwa and others around the continent on various aspects of what they're doing, and working equally across the public, private, and social sectors to achieve systemic change.
Love it. We'll talk about that in a second. One thing, actually, previously to this panel, we already had a brief chat with James about it, and I'm very keen to hear Tsitsi's view on that as well. Kind of the elephant in the room sometimes when we talk about social impact in Africa is this very, I think in my mind, outdated narrative that's sometimes floating around. And I think we'll talk about that. I actually had the honor to spend some time in South Africa. I lived there for about 1.5 years. And obviously you see a lot of international aid organizations being active. You see charity activities going on. But also when I was there between 2010 and 2012, there was really the emergence of social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs taking action. But the elephant in the room, I think, very often is that a lot of people still connect impact in Africa with the rich West giving money to Africa to develop, which I think is just a very harmful narrative to follow, because it's so much more than that, and there's so many diverse things going on across the different African ecosystems. So I'd love to hear from each of you your view on where, let's say, if we can even summarize Africa as such a vast, diverse continent, but where do you think the impact ecosystems come from in the last few years, and where do they need to go? How are they emancipating themselves from this narrative of development aid? Or is that just a thing that's in my mind sitting here in London thinking about it?
Tsitsi, I always love hearing you on this topic around kind of agency on the ground. So I'll let you go first, because I always feel like I just want to say amen at the end.
Well, I've got my own views on the ecosystem. So what we've seen in the past is, I think, we have had governments and the donor community, philanthropists, social entrepreneurs, communities working in silos. And I think each party being very respectful of one another, not to ruffle any feathers, and trying to stick to what evidence shows us, making sure that we stick to agreements, et cetera, et cetera. The models that we've had before COVID were traditional model of funding, where ideas and solutions are framed by primarily the donor, and solutions are prescribed, and the recipients, which sometimes are governments, sometimes are communities, try to implement what they have been given. Added to that, philanthropists come in with their money, hard-earned finance, and sometimes tend to use emotions to fund what they like. So I'll give an example. What we generally come across is, if one philanthropist likes neglected tropical diseases, and another one likes malaria, and another one likes cholera. So each one will approach the government separately, with the same people, by the way, the same Ministry of Health. You have 3 separate meetings, 3 separate budgets, and even if the solutions are the same, you have 3 separate solutions. But what we've seen, especially accelerated by COVID, and number one, number two, the death of George Floyd, was a willingness by all parties, especially donors, philanthropists, to be more open to question, do these models work? What does not work within the system? What can we dismantle so that we become more efficient in what we do? There's closer collaboration. We respect and trust what the actors on the ground experience and know, and then also try to align what the government is working on, what's the vision of the government, hopefully is to the extent that it reflects what the communities need. And then funding, or making funding or resources available where they are needed in a much more efficient way. And I think the inability to travel, what a blessing, because that also then holds people back from wanting to drive too much their agenda and try too much to enforce models that may not necessarily work.
Wow, I want to say amen now. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would not even add, but emphasize, is I think we're all understanding now just how much it matters. To do real systems change, you need to be proximate. You need to really understand, and the context is where these issues sit. We often used to act as though there was a technical solution that if only people had read the right book, they would have solved this issue, or if only they had a few extra dollars, they would solve the issue. And while context is interesting, it's really just to help us target our nice technical solution. I think what the last few years have shown us, and what real systems thinking is showing us, is context is the issue. And so all of the efforts need to be focused. Does the person engaged in trying to solve this issue really understand the context? And do they have the legitimacy to tackle that context? And outsiders can earn legitimacy through commitment, through consistency, and so on. But that's a task, and it's a hard task. And too often we say this person has the right degrees and they'll earn legitimacy. It's a lot easier to give someone with legitimacy the right degrees.
Got it. And do you think that, yeah, go ahead.
Something. I have to take my hat off to people like, or organizations like Dalberg. I think a systems approach has been there for a while. It's just that there was no appetite or no willingness to consider how it works and present it as a possible way in which we can effectively and efficiently solve some of the problems that challenges we face in tackling poverty, which for me is, the whole reason I think why I do what I do, what motivates me is to the extent that I can to solve the poverty issue on the continent. And the systems change approach, I have to say, is so impactful, so effective. And the investments, I think, organizations like Dalberg and others, Bertha Center in Cape Town have made over the years, I think now they're beginning to see just how worthwhile those investments were.
Got it. I love the point on systems thinking, and I also love the point of having initiatives being led by people that have the context and the experience, not in terms of some Europeans with a bunch of degrees, but in terms of people that actually can relate to the issues on the ground, which is really interesting. What do you think, from both, question to both of you, are the challenges ahead now if we think about moving the African ecosystems of impact forward? What still needs to happen to push things to the next level and solve really the biggest social and environmental issues that not just Africa is facing, but the world is facing?
So maybe I'll take a first. Yeah, I think I'll take a first cut at that. I think the biggest issue for me, so in a number of ways, the last year and a half has been transformative. The good news is it forced people to be rooted and anchored. It showed people the ways that different things intersect with each other. And it created a demand for just, you couldn't fly in and fly out. You had to be where you were and work on the things. The flip side, though, is twofold. One is there has been a massive hit to economies, not just of the countries in Africa, but to also the budgets of various actors who used to kind of provide, some of the subsidies, whatever one may think of them, in development aid and other aspects. So there's a tightening of resources, and we are also much more explicitly and clearly on a clock. I used to, a lot of my focus and passion used to be on the question of youth unemployment. And the demographics are just ticking over. And rather than creating an accelerating number of jobs, we've lost jobs over the last year and a half that will take years to recover from. And we're already tens of millions of jobs behind the pace. And that pressure, being further and further behind, itself becomes a separate other problem in terms of creating social unrest, instability, and so on. So there's that, like we're falling a bit behind on some of our targets. And in addition, things like climate change and so on, are increasingly moving from the realm things we'll need to worry about in the future to things that are the predominant shapers of the dialogue and even the experience in our environments. And so the pressure is going up. I think we've gotten some good practice in working differently, but I think we're going to have to move from practice to mastery extremely fast. There will be zero room for error, whether if you're in government, in the social sector, or in business in Africa. There's almost zero room for error over the next few years because we need to get so many things to finally work so quickly. And I think people are starting to understand what that will take. And it's a fantastic understanding. I wish we'd had it 10 years ago, but suddenly instead of a decade to get it right, we have, maybe 2 or 3 years to kind of figure things out really, really quickly. And that I think it'll create pressure. It's creating pressure.
Yeah. Tsitsi, what's your view on that?
Now, I'm a mom. I have 6 children. I work with young people. So I always have to be the ultimate optimist. So the reality is, by the turn of the century, there will be 4 billion Africans on the African continent. Right now, we are 1.2 billion. So the demographic bulge is a reality. And then, so the pressure on the land is increasing at a very fast pace. The issue is 2 things. Do we have a leadership, number one, that is willing to tackle the problem? Because it's not like we are short of ideas on what to do. I think what we have a problem with is leadership that is willing to confront the issues and have the political will and the humility to make the needs of the people a priority over political aspirations and political goals. Now, not every country is the same. I have to be mindful, Africa is 54 countries. So you have different levels of, I think, commitment to the leadership change that we need to see. However, it's not, I think it's a bit slow. Then the second thing is gender. There is gender inequality, gender injustice, and unless we empower women and girls to make decisions about their life choices, career choices, about the size of the families that they would like to have, unless we empower women on the continent are 70% of the smallholder farmers. They do the back-breaking work of feeding the continent and providing the highest, I think, contribution to GNP is agriculture for a lot of the countries. And unless we find ways which are at scale, solutions that are at scale, we invest resources that are really meaningful across the board, from your multilateral agencies to governments to private sector to philanthropists. I think we may find ourselves highly compromised in terms of security and personal freedoms.
Thank you so much for those insights. We got to wrap up already this session, but thanks both for sharing all this. And I can inspire anybody that's listening to this as well to check out the more than 1,000 innovations that ChangeNOW is presenting as well, that are being showcased, many of which are actually African entrepreneurs working across the African continent as well, and obviously also for everybody to check out the work that Dalberg Group and the Higherlife Foundation are doing across the continent. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maiko. Thank you, Tsitsi.
Thank you, James, as well. Thank you. So with that, we're actually wrapping up this session. We've been running over for a few minutes, but appreciate everybody that's been listening and tuning in. We've really covered a breadth of different ecosystems and lessons, from the lessons of Silicon Valley. Should we embrace the model of hyper growth for the impact ecosystem? How has the impact ecosystem even evolved into covering some of the challenges, especially collaborating with decision makers in government, in civil society, and in corporates, up to going and looking at the African continent and the challenges that are being in place there. Thanks everybody for joining. I really enjoyed talking to so many excellent decision makers. Make sure you use the ChangeNOW website to connect to them and take action on making our ecosystem stronger, connecting the dots between all the continents, and making sure we can work all together to solve the world's biggest problems. Thanks everybody for joining us.